We're already live. Okay, are we ready to start, Robert? Are you ready, Susan, for us to start? Starting. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. If you can hear, no, I don't even like doing that. Christian educators, but
Once you get that started, it will never stop.
I know, we're never doing that. I'm really glad to have you all here. My name is Brian Ellison. I am Executive Director of the Covenant Network of Presbyterians. I'll say a little more about what that is in just a minute, but let me allow my colleague to introduce himself.
My name is TJ Romali. I am a pastor in Boise, Idaho, and currently serving as co-moderator of the Board of Directors of the Covenant Network.
And we are also joined in leadership at this event, especially for our online partners, by another member of our board.
And I'm Susan Young-Thornton, I'm Susan Young-Thornton, a ruling elder and Christian educator, and I'm also on the board of the Covenant Network.
It is our privilege to be bringing you this workshop, Expanding Our Welcome, Practical Help, Creating Affirming Spaces. How many of you are familiar with the Covenant Network of Presbyterians already? That is heartening. We are a national organization that is separate from, but works entirely within, the Presbyterian Church USA. We have been around for 29 years. For a lot of our history, we were about helping the church change its policies to become more affirming and welcoming and inclusive of LGBTQIA plus people. We saw a lot of policy successes over those years, and some that took a lot longer than we had hoped. Since changes around ordination and marriage, the Covenant Network of Presbyterians has sort of taken a good hard look at its mission and said, do we still need to be around? And the answer again and again has overwhelmingly been yes. There is still a lot of work to do. It is one thing to change votes. It is something else to change hearts and minds. It is one thing to change policies, but it is something else to live into those policies. And what we are mostly about today is about helping churches, congregations, presbyteries live into policies that say we are a church that doesn't discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity, that creates spaces where individuals are safe and welcome and experiencing the joy and richness of the life of the church, and where people can be fully affirmed in the life and leadership of the church as well. So what we're trying to do in this workshop today is help congregations or individuals who want to be the creators of those spaces to do that as effectively as we can. Now, TJ and I have a lot of material, but we've been intentional in sort of holding it back to get through some as much as we can and create opportunities for conversation along the way. So we hope you will allow us to hear your questions and hear your ideas so that we can have a little conversation together. This is one of the online workshops, so I want to specifically welcome those of you who are joining us online. Susan Young-Thornton is going to kind of be moderating and monitoring the chat. We'll pass along your questions and conversation, might answer some of them herself as we go along. But please, those of you participating online, fully engage, and we will enjoy being community broadly together. I've been with the Covenant Network for 13 years as executive director. I was a pastor for 13 years before that. Lived the reality of trying to be a church that was welcoming and affirming, but also in my day, lived the reality of being a pastor who was serving as a gay man in the closet at a time when our church's policies didn't affirm that. And so my background is part of what keeps me so invested in believing that authenticity and safety and the ability to be fully who we are together is critical for our life as a church. It's not just about equality and justice for me as an LGBTQ person. It's about the church being better, when all of us can be there together with authenticity. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to TJ to get us started.
Yes. So this is a risk at this point in the morning, especially if you haven't had enough coffee. But what I would like to invite you to do is take just a few moments, close your eyes if that's not a scary thing, and you promise not to fall asleep. And I want you to picture a time when you felt truly welcome or at home. Maybe it was in a church setting, maybe it was somewhere else in your life, but picture a time when you felt truly welcomed or at home. Think about where you were. Think about what happened. Who was there? What did they do? And as you're picturing that in your mind, is there something specific about that experience that made you feel truly seen? I'm giving you just a few seconds of silence there to linger in that welcoming space. So now let's come back into this space. Hopefully it too is a welcoming space where you can feel seen. And I'm curious if you just want to call out any words or phrases that describe welcome as you were reflecting on that image in your mind. And I'm going to repeat them as you call them out so that our folks online can benefit as well. And perhaps some of them will have some words to share through Susan. Any words or phrases come to mind as you are picturing the space where you were? Comfort. Joyful. Hugs and laughter. Named. Prepared. Belonging.
Come online.
Kingship.
Come online. Love. Acceptance. Peace.
Love, acceptance, and peace.
I want to add safety.
Safety. Absolutely.
Warmth, both like a physical and emotional.
Warmth. Physical warmth and emotional warmth.
Being seen.
Being seen. Yeah. Are there folks in your life who have been instrumental in deepening your understanding of what it is to feel welcome? Either they taught it through the lessons learned or they taught it through their presence. Anyone come to your mind? Who have those people been for you? They initiated the contact. Yeah.
It was one-on-one inviting me into a group.
One-on-one, inviting you in to a group. Mm-hmm.
They didn't expect me to change.
They didn't expect you to change. Yeah.
Glad I was there.
Glad that you were there. Yeah.
Welcome to my questions.
Welcome to the questions. Yeah.
Truth tellers.
Truth tellers.
Prepare the meal.
Prepare the meal. Food can talk, can it?
Holding space, just allowing for them to come however they are to that space and then not necessarily trying to do anything with it. So kind of reading the room, so as they came in, how they did. how did they kind of respond?
Yeah. Reading the room, holding space, not even necessarily doing anything with that space, just holding it. Yeah. Well, as we jump into this next phase of the conversation of what welcome is, I hope that you'll be drawing on those experiences of where you have felt most welcomed and what it feels like to be known and seen.
You know, we've called this workshop Expanding Our Welcome. Welcome is this word that gets thrown around in this conversation a lot. In fact, the organization of groups in every denomination that does this work is collectively known as the welcoming church movement. Welcome is the image that we've chosen to talk about this work. A lot of people point out that welcome is not without its problems as a way of conceiving what we're trying to do here. Welcome can be a pretty shallow word. We actually literally print it on doormats on it. Welcome is something that we can say with a word and then not back it up with actions. Welcome, it can sometimes mean, yes, you're more than welcome to come here, where we will try to fix you or change you or exclude you, but you're welcome. I want us to reclaim the word welcome in all of its robustness and depth of meaning. And in fact, I want us to weight the word welcome with theological meaning. Because I think welcoming is a deeply theological practice. And not only that, I think it's essential to who we are as Christians, as Reformed Christians, those of us who are from Reformed churches, Presbyterians. Where do we think God is in our tradition? Do we think God is far up in heaven? Where do we think God is? How do we, let's ask this. Oh, yeah.
I was just going to say, in our theology of communion, the way that we understand God as the server of the communion.
Yes.
And presiding at that table. And that in the act of communion, our hearts are all lifted up to heaven to be in God's presence.
It's an excellent example.
It's a lovely example.
So repeating, in the act of communion, we talk about God being present in the presiding of communion and in the hearts gathered around being lifted up into God's presence. That's exactly right. There are traditions who treat communion differently, right? That say that Jesus is present in the bread, which becomes Jesus' body, or in the wine. Our tradition lifts up that Christ is present, as Calvin said, not on the table, but around the table. Christ is present in community when people come together to a place where they have been welcomed. How do we make decisions in our tradition?
Was it not the same root word? I mean, it's kind of at the same root, so.
Right. Community, communion, right. We don't outsource our decisions to one person who is in charge. At least in the Presbyterian tradition, we only give power to groups of people who have to invest in each other and listen to each other and form some sort of communion to make a decision, whether that's a session or a presbytery or a general assembly. We believe Christ exists in community, which then means that a word like welcome, which is about who has access to the community, not just to being present in it, but to being engaged in it, to being a fully part of it. Who has access, who is welcomed, is now not just a matter of who gets punch and cookies after church. It's now not just a matter of whether there's a physical spot in a pew. Now it's about whether you are encountering the risen Christ. Now it's about whether you are in the place where we think God is to be found. Now, the flip side of that affirmation, that robust understanding of welcome, is that it also theologically weights what it would mean for someone not to have access to community. What it means is that if we are systematically excluding people from that sense of connection, that sense of trust and relationship and covenant, well, it's more than just keeping them from the cookies and punch. It's more than just making them uncomfortable. It is us keeping them from God. It is systematically excluding them from the place we think God dwells. And I would argue that is a scandal to the gospel. That is the worst thing we can do. Worse than a bad sermon, worse than an inadequate mission budget. Keeping someone from the gospel, keeping someone from Christ is a tragedy. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry.
What were you trying to say?
It keeps us all from God.
Yeah, well, you're exactly right. Because if we believe that Christ dwells in them,
In the us.
yes, in us together, and the us is no longer complete, we're depriving ourselves as well as them. And let me deepen it one step further. We can speak of this in very general terms about church policies that exclude. But sometimes all of us have been in situations where we have known people are being excluded, intentionally or unintentionally, just not feeling welcome, not willing to test it out. And where we know that's happening and we don't do something about it, well, we call that complicity. It doesn't matter that we weren't the ones who made the policy. It doesn't matter that we aren't using anti-LGBTQ slurs in our daily speech. If we know that people are being excluded and we aren't acting to fix it, aren't trying to take these practical steps that we're talking about today, we're right in it. And I believe in sin, and I think that's what sin is. It's being complicit in the things that keep people from God. So to help us think now about this theological issue, we're going to move into the practical piece of how we acting on our theology can become less complicit and can actively engage the fullness of God's people in experiencing the fullness of God. There's lots of ways we could talk about this, and there's way more practical ideas and options than we're going to cover in the remaining hour of this workshop. But what I hope is that much of what we accomplish here sort of triggers your thinking, starts the flow of ideas, and maybe allows you to connect with others even in the room to keep thinking about what else we can be doing. We might group when I work with congregations, and I do this all over the country, the ways that churches can take steps to be more welcoming, to be more affirming, I think fall sort of generally into three categories, and each of them is worth a little bit of attention. The first is the preparation that is required to be a welcoming space. You can't just decide, we're welcoming now. You got to do some work. That work in this space, especially, I'm going to call education. And we'll talk about that. The second piece that I said you can't just decide, but you do have to decide. A lot of churches want to educate, and never actually decide, because that might be controversial or difficult, or they're not in agreement. But discernment is required. And LGBTQIA plus people, and a lot of other marginalized people as well, need to know that the people in charge have decided they are welcome. And then a third piece, and we'll spend a lot of our time here, is on the actions, the practical steps of living. Once you have done the work, although it's probably never finished, and once you've decided, though that's a decision you may need to revisit from time to time, what are you going to do day in and day out to change your life as a community so that all are truly welcome? And these are the three categories that we're going to live in for the next part of this workshop. I'll turn it over to TJ to take us through the first couple. Oops, if you were ready to go to that slide? Okay.
Yep. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about preparing for change and what that looks like. And for a space like this, filled with folks who care deeply about nurturing the faith and lifelong learning as educators in the church and in the world, here's a helpful hint about this area. It's all about education. And so a few helpful pointers for those who aren't quite sure where to get started. First, it is a good idea to treat the topics of welcome and inclusion in as many ways as possible as a normal, regular part of education. If your congregation or your organization has a practice of doing regular hot button topic issues in the winter series, great. This is not necessarily the time to create a hot button issue series if you have never done that before, because what it implies then is, well, wait, there's something for us to be angry about here. So let's show up and find our anger. So if you have regular series, if you have a regular adult education course on Sundays or on Wednesday nights, or you have guest speakers in the month of January, whatever that culture that has been built up over the course of the eons, how can welcome and inclusion and these steps of education fit into what we are already doing? Another important point is to love people into a fuller understanding, or to say that in a different way, to meet people where they are. And that might mean, in a congregational context, that you are going to have to slow a few of the full speed ahead activists down a little bit, not to turn out their light or blow out their candle, but to make sure that we are meeting those who are a little bit further behind on the journey where they are. How can we come together in such a way that we are not using advanced 401 level terminology in an introductory session? And yet, how do we also see the full humanity of each and every person where they are? It is quite possible that we will be in the room with folks who believe that they have never met a queer person in their life. And at the same time, a grandparent who is quietly grieving because their grandchild is trans, non-binary, they see the news and the headlines and they're terrified and they don't know how to say that out loud. How do we gather all of that in a space and love folks exactly where they are? Where possible, center the voices of LGBTQIA+ people. That means that if there are folks who are ready to serve, ready to teach, ready to lead, books written by LGBTQIA+ people, to center those voices as much as possible. And at the same time, the nuance there is that we cannot expect a marginalized community of any kind to have to do all of the heavy lifting to teach others why they deserve dignity. So there is nuance there. How do we center voices so that we are not stealing the microphone as well-meaning allies, for example, while also not expecting that we can just pick the brains of a marginalized person and have them do all the work for us.
Can I add something there too, TJ?
Absolutely.
I think this is especially worth thinking about as more and more LGBTQIA+ people are in fact taking on church leadership roles, but often as the first queer pastor, the first Christian educator in the church to be from the LGBTQ community, and they find themselves often as the only, they are the ones planning the lessons, and so they find themselves as Exhibit A. And it is important for those of us who are not the pastor or the Christian educator in that setting to come alongside that person, that church leader, and make sure that they don't feel like they're the only one, that they just have to do it themselves. A lot of pastors and Christian educators will not step aside because they think they'd be burdening someone else to do it, and they have the knowledge, so they're just going to do it. But it takes a toll. So find ways for the community to really model community, even in this education piece, is really important.
The next point, I think, is a cardinal rule for any educator on any topic. There are resources out there. And we should make sure we know what the resources are before we use them. So, rather than a grab-and-go curriculum with a title on the cover that sounds really great and hand it off to a teacher and say, have fun, without looking at who it was written by, who published it, what the finer points are when you get to the end. If you would not do that with any Bible story or any topic from any curricular resource known to humankind, it's probably a good idea that you would not want to do that for sources that claim to be welcoming. As Brian alluded to earlier, there are plenty of resources for example, some of our non-denominational Christian sisters and siblings in the family tree of Christianity that care deeply about welcome, in the sense of how can we get you in the door and fix you. They use the word welcome in that curriculum as well. Don't let the title fool you. Don't judge the book by the cover. Make sure you know what you are teaching before you teach it. And then, of course, there are folks out there I would imagine, many of the denominations represented here at APCE. For example, the Covenant Network of Presbyterians doing our work alongside congregations, presbyteries, and the General Assembly of the PCUSA. Lean on those folks who create a community of their own. Right? One of the things I value so deeply about the Covenant Network of Presbyterians is that there are 450 congregations throughout the country that we can learn from our congregations and leaders in Minneapolis. We can learn from our congregations who are in Texas. We can learn from one another as we are experiencing varying things in the world. And if you have had someone come to you and say, hey, I'm moving out of state and I don't know how to find a new church, well, this is also the sort of place you can lean on to support folks in finding a new faith home in those times of transition. Community exists in many ways, and that is why the word network appears in Covenant Network. It is that network of community bonding across the lines there.
I might also just add that the Covenant Network website is a great resource for resources. We redid our website in this past year, and when I say we, I mostly mean TJ. But we have a much more accessible resource library online than we've ever had before. It's sortable and searchable by the type of resource you're going for, by the topic, videos, books, curriculum. It is really helpful, and a lot of churches are using it and finding it very helpful. So I encourage you to check it out, as well as finding the local churches that are part of the network and everything else that's there. So, should we pause for questions if there are any on this?
Yeah, any thoughts on this first step of the preparation for change, AKA education? Anything you would add or any questions that you have?
That was, apparently you covered it completely without
it.
further, yes.
You
Yes.
know, oh,
One is how have you found churches begin this conversation? In my experience, ours is sort of, we just sort of lived into it as we talked about. Jesus taught us to love. In my congregation, we've not really had, like a movement to discuss it. In the denomination, when Senate brings things, and some people didn't like the vote, and so they are protesting, and others, whether you're concerned or you're compassionate sides, so how, I don't know, we've got the statement in our bulletin, and people are living into it that way, but I don't think we really started that intentional conversation issue we're talking about.
Well, you're not alone. A lot of times the conversation starts not the way you would want it to, right? A lot of times it starts after an incident, or the first couple comes and asks to have their same-sex wedding at the church, and now we're going to start the conversation with someone's lives as the main topic of discussion. That is not the ideal way to do it. But I do think the churches that I think are most successful at starting a conversation in a way that leads to growth are the ones where it's not just the pastor saying, I think this is an important topic and we're going to talk about it, but one that emerges from a group of folks who say, we want to put this together. They start with a small group, their core group that is absolutely committed to it. They don't think all the work happens in a town hall that invites the whole congregation to a big meeting. It starts with one-on-one conversations. Remember, what creates welcoming spaces? You were invited into it one-on-one. It encompasses groups that already have a sense of covenant or community. Maybe in the church I grew up in, if you had wanted to have this conversation, which they did not, but they would have wanted to start with the women's circles in that church. That's where the covenant communities were already strong, and they could talk about anything, and that's where you would have wanted it to happen. What are those places where people will engage and let it spread organically? Because let the Holy Spirit take it through the congregation. It doesn't all have to come from the pulpit. Or from the session, or from adult education schedule. But it does have to be intentional. That's a good question.
When you talk about meeting people where they are, you did mention there are some who are not there yet, so to speak, in terms of being allies. And short of people taking their ball and going home, which we've had, this can be seen as politically charged, among other things. Everything's politically charged at this point. But finding that balance to not only support and be an ally to those in the LGBTQIA+ community, but also those who are not, and how to walk alongside them. So if we're meeting people where they are, obviously they have a lot more to change. And what does that look like in terms of pastoring to them, as much as you are trying to help be pastor to those who are within the community, or those who are already there as allies?
Yeah. A great question. The question of how do we meet everyone where they are when that journey is so different and that spectrum is so large. One of the things that comes to mind is a congregation in South Carolina that has been doing this intentional work, this stage of educational work over a period of 5 years. Which sounds like a very long time, and it is a very long time, right? But that slow and steady, the tortoise and the hare comes to mind in that slow and steady. What that congregation, and of course every congregation has its own unique facets and quibbles, but what that congregation has learned is to meet folks where they are means to go much more slowly than they had initially imagined. And what they have found over the period of 5 years is that some folks are never going to change their minds. And some folks are going to storm off and they are going to leave. And some folks are going to be sitting in worship thinking that they are never going to change their mind, and hearing the senior Sunday testimony of a gay senior and realize, I think I heard the voice of God in that sermon, right? And that would not have happened if they did a 3-month in and out study, right? It was a period of 5 years. And for them, that's what meeting folks where they are means. I think the other thing, and we'll talk about this more in other sections, there is a difference between meeting folks where they are and also allowing hurtful and harmful speech, right? And
Don't mishear us as saying that this is a license to procrastinate conversation while other people suffer.
Yes.
Not what we're saying.
I would just add a couple of pieces to your education piece, and to not overlook what is in Presbyterian world officer training. Talking about and educating your congregational leadership around the theology of welcome. First of all, give it rooted in polity, no problem, but also rooted in scripture. So I would really encourage folks to think about including officer training. The other thing is,
Just repeating this for the Zoom folks, I don't realize we're not micing you well. Officer training is a place that you can include this, and leadership development, which is core to how we understand our job as church leaders anyway, this is a good place for that. So go ahead.
And if you have deacons, oh my Lord. Okay, the other piece is just that space teaches, as well as curriculum resource material. And I think there's a correlation between what we say we are as welcoming and what our spaces teach about welcome.
yeah, space teaches, as any educator would know. And so what does it look like to speak that welcome through the physical space, right? And so just briefly, the second step is deciding to change. As Brian said, some churches get into the spinning of the tires and they educate, and that way we can avoid the decision making, because decision making is scary. And why would we want to do that when we can just educate and keep on keeping on, right? At some point, whatever it is in your denominational context, a session, a council, a governing body, whatever that looks like, a decision needs to be made. And at its best, those decisions are happening organically and not in response to the queer couple wanting to baptize their child in worship, but in response to what we have learned together in community. What often happens is that there's a statement of welcome that is endorsed, and that statement becomes, here is where we stand, right? And as we'll talk about in the bulk of our conversation, if that statement of welcome, here is where we stand, is where we end, then are we really standing for anything at all?
You say that again or differently, here's where we stand, here's where we end. What do you mean?
Yes, great. Here's where we stand. If we write a statement and say, yep, we voted on it unanimously in our council, we're going to put it on a sub-page of a sub-page of a sub-page on our church website, and we're going to hide it on page 240 of the annual report, because no one is going to flip that far. And then we say, oh yeah, no, we're welcoming. We made that decision in 2014. What's the problem? if we say here's where we stand and we do nothing with it, then it is like many strategic plans that go right up on the bookshelf to collect dust. Yeah.
So, just going to your question as well. So, this is a very contextual situation right now. So the church I serve, they have been an open and affirming church for like 40 years.
I'm keeping it close just
Oh, okay.
Pick it up a little.
So they've been open and affirming for like 40 years. Back in the day, they were like marching in pride, but they've become lazy. I'm putting it simply, they've become lazy. They're like, well, we've been open and affirming for years. Do we need to actually be at pride anymore? Do we need to have a pride flag? Do we need to have all these things? People should know by now. And so, yeah, we've done the actionable stuff decades ago, but action is consistent. It needs to continually happen. So, like, we're back to almost we've released the statement of welcome. So, like, it's not just we've said it. We've done it in the past. So, yeah. So just going back to your.
I mean, it sounds to me like they need to be at Pride now more than ever before. Not for Pride, they'll be fine without them.
Yeah.
They need to be there.
Yeah, and we've challenged them, and they've started to show up. Because the problem is they're great at wanting the staff to lead it, but as far as them as lay leaders and members in general, they're like, well, the staff do it. We've got queer staff members. It's great. But what about you guys? Us staff members aren't going to be here forever.
The welcoming statement sometimes gets, I think, more attention than it needs to, precisely for kind of this reason. Words are words. But it does need, but there needs to be some presentation of the church's decision to be affirming. And that might be joining the Covenant Network or More Light Presbyterians or whatever your denomination's organization is. It might be putting this statement on your website, but the making the decision is important, but don't become consumed or think that's the finish line. We also, we're running a little behind, but we can talk if you have questions about sort of the content of the statement as well, because I think some statements are better than others. They should reflect the authentic voice of your congregation, but there are some authentic things you should say, and there's some things maybe you shouldn't. So we can talk about that if you want to.
I'd love to talk.
Okay.
If this isn't the right
No. Do you have a specific reference point?
I mean, so the congregation that I serve has made the decision. I don't know that we've got the welcome statement, but it's a small enough congregation that it's understood.
Uh-huh.
But I think best practices, whether in the statement or just, and frankly, especially from the pulpit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing that I would say, I try to limit quoting Brene Brown to 1 time per day, and so you're about to get the 1 time per day. What Brene Brown says is clear as kind. And so what we often think is let's keep things as general as possible or all-encompassing as possible. If we say all are welcome, then we've covered our bases, right? But that is not clear. There's no clarity. What do we mean by all? What do we mean by welcome, right? Specificity is key. And being more specific in the who's, what's, where's, when's, how's, and why's of welcome. If we say, for example, we welcome all people regardless of their sexual orientation and gender identity, the word regardless, if you stop and think about it, well, that sounds like, well, we'll welcome you anyway,
I
right?
don't care about your sexual orientation.
I don't care, and we'll let you in. But the word, so some wordsmithing for those in a congregation that love the thesaurus. and love to dig into what words mean. I would say clear is kind, specificity is key, and being very careful of a word like regardless that might sound like a throwaway word, but will not be received as such.
It is a place, though, where there's an opportunity for great creativity in your congregation and to have it be the authentic voice. Don't copy another church's welcoming statement. Let it really emerge from your people. I do think, I will be prescriptive in this way. If it doesn't mention sexual orientation, gender identity, LGBTQIA plus people will not understand it as applying to them. If it says all are welcome, if it says people of all walks of life and persuasions or something, LGBTQ people will read that as they don't mean me. Or I've heard that from churches before and they didn't mean it. Or I went to that church and I wasn't welcome. If you mean sexual orientation and gender identity, say it. And if you want to get even more specific, say, we welcome lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual, pansexual people in this congregation. That may not be an authentic voice for your congregation. That you may not be able to do that. But clear is kind. Specificity causes trust. Be sure it's true. That's the last thing we can say about that. Don't publish your aspirational statement as though it is fact. The very worst thing we can do, I mean really, the very worst thing we can do is trick LGBTQ people into coming to our churches only to wound them again. Please don't do it. Don't join More Light Presbyterians. Don't join the Covenant Network. Don't put a welcoming statement on your website if your church is not welcoming. Now, if you're on the journey, we'll walk with you on it. Not saying don't call us, but be honest.
To that point, if, say, we as a congregation want to join, but we don't know if we're there yet, would you refrain or restrain yourself from posting on your website that you are a member of the Covenant Network until you feel as though you are truly living into it?
Well,
Because
I would,
if we say we're the member of the Covenant Network and then somebody shows up and is insulted and wounded and all that sort of stuff, then obviously we're giving you a bad name and, and us. So would you say wait until there's a certain threshold, for lack of a better term, or education?
well, I'm not overly worried about the Covenant Network's name, but yes, I think just like anything else you would do as a church leader, I would say think about the impact of what you're doing on the people that you are trying to serve, and be honest. Have an honest enough self-assessment that if you're not ready, that you live like you're not ready, and if you are ready, act with boldness. I do not think it's necessary for the church to be unanimous, because they never will be. I don't think, and I also don't think most queer people expect you to be. I don't think most queer people show up at a church for the first Sunday and aren't prepared for the possibility that one person down at the end of the other pew gives them a sideways look. That can happen. But what I think is realistic for them to expect, if you say you're an affirming church, is that there is intentionality about creating a space where they are celebrated as part of the community. They see other people in leadership. They see representation of various kinds of families. There are pronoun stickers on people's name tags. There's an all-gender restroom. There's something that suggests to them, this is a space for me, and I belong here. It's not necessarily that they don't ever have a hard experience or a tough conversation. Queer folks have been wounded by the church, but we're not made of crepe paper. The resilience is part of the journey as well. Ready to move on?
Yep, that's a great segue.
So we want to then talk about, now we're getting to this is the part that most people come to this workshop thinking the whole workshop is this. It's okay if it is, but I just recognize the limitations of these workshops for actually putting together like an action plan for a church. That won't happen by the end of this workshop. So consider this kind of the sprinkling of the seeds. You'll see where they end up and what grows and what takes off in your own heart and in your congregations. I think there's several ways that churches can live into change with particular actions that make the church a more welcoming space. One group of these actions I kind of group as called acts of hospitality. Much like the word welcome, I think hospitality can be a really fraught word as well, especially if you think of the word hospitality and sort of this meaning of there's a host and there's a guest. We are the host, they are the guest. We have everything to offer. They are just there to be served by us. That is not really how I think of church. It certainly is not how I encourage you to treat LGBTQ people who might come to your church. So don't go too far with what I'm saying about hospitality. But I think it's still a good word to use because it's an undeniable Christian virtue. And you probably do not have to convince anyone in your church that hospitality is a good thing. Even the most conservative person who swears they've never met an LGBTQ person in their life still believes that if someone looks hungry, you should give them food. Still believes that when someone walks through the door, someone should smile at them and say, "We're glad you're here." Hospitality is a good model for for the kind of space we are trying to create, especially for people who have not been part of churches before, or our church before. If that is the case, then we have to ask ourselves hard questions about what hospitality looks like, particularly with regard to LGBTQIA+ people. It means that every church has to think about, for example, the language it is using, especially in worship, which in our tradition we deem to be our central act, the place where we all come together. You can be on lots of different committees. You don't have to be a deacon or elder. Some people work at the food pantry and some at the homeless shelter, but everyone is part of worship. What is the language we are using there, and what is it saying about what we believe about God and about people? I am talking about gender. I'm inviting us to think about even the things we say so often that we don't even notice we're saying them. Are they really welcoming of all of the people who might come to your church? When I was in seminary, the inclusive thing we were taught to say, and I'm sure for many of you as well, was brothers and sisters. Welcome. That was the progressive thing to say. Actually, if you're progressive, you'd say sisters and brothers. But that doesn't include everybody who might come to your church. It doesn't include people who are non-binary or who do not identify as a sister or brother.
What would you use as a third? Like if you would say sisters and brothers and...
So I don't think we have to throw away the language. I might say sisters and brothers, siblings in Christ. I might say family of God.
But if you were to say, like, is there a third option if you were to choose brothers and sisters?
I think sibling is the best I've got for you.
Brothers, sisters, siblings. In Christ.
I might say that.
Okay.
And then another one that I've heard, especially for non-binary folk, is nibbling.
I have heard that. I think maybe that works with some education and explanation.
It depends within the context.
Yes. I think it might make some people giggle, and I mean in a joyful way, but maybe that's an opportunity for conversation and education. I've heard that for nieces, nephews, nibblings, but I guess what I would say is be joyful but not silly, and find the right thing for your context. All of the examples I just gave are family references. Family references aren't always the right language. Not everyone has a great experience with their family, by the way. And maybe we need to strive for an even greater expansiveness in our language. That's if you go to other workshops on this or read more about this, we tend not to even use the word inclusive as much anymore as the word expansive when we talk about language, because God is expansive. love of Christ is expansive, and it is not limited by the same set of words we've always used. Think about the language of Scripture. Think about the way the body of Christ is addressed. Think about calling people body of Christ. Think about community of faithful. Think about covenant partners. We have lots of language we can use, and most of it isn't gendered. We also, Susan with the Zoom.
I'm getting a couple of questions about the conversation, so if we could take the mic around so they can hear. They would love to say.
Oh, okay. Forgive me. I apologize to the Zoom people. We'll do that more faithfully as people share from the floor. Another place where gender is brought to the fore in a lot of church conversations right now is about facilities, particularly restroom facilities, the space in our churches that has tended historically to be gendered space. And the reality that in many of our churches, which are older buildings, it is not automatically obvious how a church would accommodate a more diverse set of restroom options. But I am here to tell you it matters. It matters to trans and non-binary folks that they can have a space to pee without judgment, without fear, without worrying what someone might think if they see them going in that particular door. We all want a space where that isn't something we have to worry about when we're going to the bathroom, don't we? And it's a very basic act of hospitality. And the word hospitality is the right word here, because hospitality doesn't demand that you understand it. You don't have to know how they feel. You just have to know that they feel that way. And then you want to serve someone because that's what we do. I will say a lot of churches do find creative ways, surprisingly creative ways, to provide all gender restroom spaces. Basically, any single stall room, toilet, can be your all gender restroom, and should be, actually. Why does it have to be labeled if there's only one person in there at a time? They all can be all gender restrooms. If you don't have that, maybe you just set aside a larger restroom and put a lock on the door and say, that's the all gender restroom. It doesn't matter that there's 4 urinals and 4 toilet stalls in there. Right now, it's for the one person using it. That's a way of accommodating. Sorry, you had a question.
Do you want me to mic?
TJ will give.
I was just saying, with the beauty of universal design, I think any church that does an all-gender bathroom will find it's great for people who might need assistance in the restroom.
Yes.
Whether that's someone assisting, a child who's a different gender, it's going to be more comfortable.
A family, so-called family restroom.
Exactly. Well, and I wouldn't even say family, but definitely for adults with disabilities who may have a different gender caregiver, like, I prefer the family restroom. I mean, I think a lot of people like to have their own space for a lot of different reasons. So I think it's also one of those universal things that's a lot more welcoming than people may realize.
That's very good input. And that is the solution a lot of churches have. It's as simple as changing the sign on a room they already have. But that sign isn't then just a message to LGBTQ people or trans or non-binary people. It's a message for the whole church about something we prioritize, about something we care about, in a way we choose to live toward one another. Pronouns. I sense that this room is full of folks who have a pretty good understanding around pronouns, but I don't want to neglect it because it remains important. When we all use our pronouns, we normalize gender identity as something that may or may not be clear or obvious, that may differ from a person's gender expression. And we make the point that there isn't a norm that doesn't require identification and an exception that does. So when I say, I'm Brian, my pronouns are he, him, it's not because I didn't think you knew that. It's because I'm saying we all have a gender. We all have an identity, and I'm not more normal or special because you already guessed what mine was. It's an act of hospitality. Any questions here? We'll pause. We have a couple other acts, categories of acts. You want to add anything, teacher? No? All right. Another sort of area where I think churches might take practical steps to live into change are with what I would call acts of visibility. Choosing how we present ourselves to one another so we better understand one another. One way that the Presbyterian Church USA has done this throughout its history, and especially since reunion, is by talking a lot about representation. We are attentive to who's in the room for committees, for gatherings. We are committed to not discriminating, and in fact, we're committed to working hard to make sure that our gatherings are as reflective of our diversity as we possibly can. That applies here, and it applies not just to committee memberships. It applies to our life together. How are we representing the whole of God's people in the life of the church? A question I often ask, because it seems like it's pretty low stakes, but it opens a lot of eyes, is who lights the Advent candles at your church? And when you close your eyes and you imagine the Advent candle lighting, who do you see? I bet for a lot of you, it's mom and dad and two very cute children who read a Bible verse, the other one who lights the candle and goes out because they aren't tall enough to reach the candle. But it's a very traditional family, so-called traditional family, right? That's what you envision. But in your church, what if you have a same-sex couple light the Advent wreath? What if you have a group of older single friends light the Advent candle? What if you're attentive to the fullness of the church's life in who you put up front? Make sure there are queer folks reading scripture, teaching children's Sunday school, ushering, being elders. All of these things matter and send a message to the church. Also think about representation in things like your advertising, your brochures, your website. Who is pictured as the church? And this isn't just for outreach. This isn't just for your evangelism. This is the message you are sending to your own people.
And along that line, even though it goes back to the bathroom question, one of our online participants has suggested that turning a restroom into a single restroom, if you can, at a grab bar, a toddler toilet seat, and those sorts of things, because we're talking about hospitality across the board.
That's right. And even though this workshop is clearly focused on LGBTQIA plus inclusion, I think the principles of being intentional about welcome do apply to a variety of communities that have been marginalized by the church intentionally or unintentionally through the years, including people with disabilities, including neurodiverse communities, including people of color, including people whose first language is not English. When we start thinking along these lines, we're going to keep seeing it in other places. Another question of visibility that often it's often where churches start. This is what they want to talk about with me first, is should we put up a pride flag or a rainbow flag? Or they have put up a rainbow flag and now 25 people in the church are mad. How important is that kind of symbol? What do you all think? Yeah.
So I actually had this, I've actually had this kind of question and had discussions. It was a number of years ago. But going back to that question that I asked earlier, what does it say for the people who are not there yet? We're not talking about the ones who are being and saying cruel or hurtful things. We're talking about people who maybe know anybody in the community but aren't necessarily and are supportive of them, etc. So that is a question that I have, but to answer it, I think that it's a yes, but. Because as I said in a conversation with somebody about that, saying, why haven't you put out a flag? Who's in the community? And I said, I can stand up there as a cishet, white, heterosexual woman married with 2 children and say that we're affirming, but unless you walk in and feel that, you are the best advertisement to speak to others in your community to say, this is an affirming place where I feel safe.
So I think that's a very good answer, Catherine. And I think the reality is that you don't have to have a pride flag. There's nothing magical about it. But if you don't have one, what are you doing instead? How are you sending the message that when you say everyone in our community knows we're affirming, so we don't need that, how is it that they know? Are you sure? What's good about a pride flag or a pride progress flag or painting the steps of your church in rainbow colors, what's good about that is that people do know what you mean. And if you're not speaking with clarity, as we've said earlier about other things, you are not telling LGBTQI plus people that they're welcome there. A lot of people are afraid of signs and symbols being a reason that someone might vandalize the church. I definitely know churches that buy their pride flags in bulk. They've accepted that as part of the calculus. We're going to buy a pride flag and put it up, and someone's going to, at some point, is going to tear it down. And you know what we're going to do the next day? We're going to put up another pride flag. It's a choice that your church has to make. How important is this to send this particular message? John Peter.
As somebody where my former church was, the pride flag was vandalized and then the next year was stolen. It actually ended up being a very wonderful, frankly, graceful conversation with the community about that, because there were those in the community who were not a part of the church who were as scandalized. And so just that whole, the support and the care was actually probably more effective than if nothing had happened to the flag. So it was a very, very interesting outcome.
Well, and it makes the point that a lot of this, we often think about this as the only reason we do all these things is to attract LGBTQ people to become members of our church. We talk about this like this is a church growth strategy class. It is not. I mean, that might happen. I have seen that happen. But that isn't the reason to do it. And it also might not happen. We do it because it's the right thing to do. And in many ways, the chief beneficiaries of the work might turn out to be your own people who come to new levels of faith and love and compassion because they've re-understood who they are as the body of Christ.
Just a side note, when it comes to, you said buying the pride flags in bulk, it's not just because of vandalism. We buy them in bulk because they get destroyed by the weather.
Yes,
so
those bright colors do.
recommendation.
Those colors do bleed, in fact, yes. The other place where I think that kind of blurs the line between visibility and publicity is, as we were talking about earlier, participating in pride festivals. This was pretty novel about a decade ago. It's a lot more common now for churches to be doing it. I still think it's more important than a lot of churches realize. And mostly I think it's important to the church. TJ's congregation in Boise, Idaho is one that has been going to Pride for a long time. And I think knowing both TJ and his predecessors' stories about Pride, some of the deepest impact it has on their church is the impact it has on their church to be there, to hear the things that are said to them when they are there representing Jesus to the LGBTQ community, and the things that are, the ways that that is received. Back in, it's now been 10 years, I was in New York City on the Pride Parade Day. And I actually preached at First Pres New York City, which is on the route. And the First Pres New York City has this ministry that they've had for like 40 years of the police leave a little space in the barrier in front of the church so the church can do this ministry of taking out cups of cold water to the people who are marching. And it's like 2 miles into the route. They're hot, they're exhausted. And clergy in their collars, church people wearing their church name tags, other clergy from other churches wearing stoles are the ones running the water out to the parade route. and I got to do this. I almost still get teary remembering this 10 years ago, because the way people received that from me, they'd like do this double take and they'd see like a clergy collar and you'd think I was handing them like a stack of $1,000 or something. It was like, they couldn't believe that a church was doing this for them, a cup of water. It still matters that the body of Christ shows up and shows compassion. It defies people's expectations still, and I think maybe more so now than a few years ago.
And on that note, Pride is the huge celebration of joy. There are so many ways to show up these days, perhaps more now than in recent years. When an anti-trans bill is introduced in city council or by a local school board, or a book ban in the local library system, or a new state law and you happen to live near the state capitol. Earlier, I mentioned the importance of not expecting an LGBTQIA+ person to have to do all the work of educating. It is a powerful, powerful statement to show up to a state committee hearing in a clergy collar or with signs of faith as a layperson, and speaking words of Christian love and affirmation in a space that is typically hearing those words of Christianity in a completely different way, right? For the past several decades, the voice of Christianity has been ceded to certain portions of the Christian tradition. And we now can call many of those sorts of laws and policies enacted Christian nationalism, right? It is so hurtful to see a city council meeting talking about an anti-trans bill and the only people there speaking out are trans folks themselves. What does it look like to show up, whether as a public witness ready to testify, or simply a witness in the seats next to someone who is shaking profusely as they are about to take the microphone, so that they know that they're not alone on the journey? That too is a part of public witness.
The only other act of publicity I would lift up as we're running a little short on time here is thinking about your website. And I want to really lift this up as the single most important outward focused thing you have to worry about. More important than the pride flag, more important than what's on your sign, is what's on your website. There is no one who visits churches anymore without visiting your website first. Period. And if they have to look to submenu 4 of page 17 of your website to find that LGBTQ people exist, they will assume that it is not a place for them. It needs to be on the homepage, or it might as well not be there at all. Whether that's a pride flag symbol or the full welcoming statement, you have to find a way to convey on your website that this is who you are, or people will not believe it. And that's about the clearest thing I'm going to say in this whole workshop. The website's really important. Also, put your worship times on there, for Pete's sake. That really annoys me when I can't. Yeah, as a guest preacher, I really cannot tell you how often I go to a church website to figure out when I'm supposed to show up. Like, where is it? Anyway, that's an aside.
And that opportunity for representation, again, thinking even outside the topic that we are here discussing today, I have had folks visit the congregation for the first time because they saw the list of elders and deacons on the leadership page and noticed that we had what appeared to be female names on the session. And they were coming out of a tradition where women could not serve in leadership roles in the church. And so we can sometimes overthink what it looks like to be clear on the website, but more than once I have had the situation where just having the names of the elders on the website was something that made a couple feel like they were welcome to have a voice there. So that too, yeah. Any other thoughts on this publicity and visibility? Yes.
As your session began, you talked about meeting people where they are and how nice that is and Christian that is. Once we make a decision, don't we meet people where we are? Isn't that kind because it's clear and honest and therefore welcoming? Do we, again, they meet people where they are, but as they come in, we've made a decision, we've made an action. This is who we are. And that's what I hear you saying with all of the facilities and with all the signage, that we are now meeting people with who we are. And that's a good thing. That's not a rejection of them, but helping them know what community they're coming into.
Yeah, that's a great insight. I mean, the meeting where folks are in the sense of discernment and of education, there does come a point where meeting where we have chosen to take a stand. The interesting thing about showing, having the Progress Pride flag on the homepage is that sends the signal to those who need to know that they are welcome. It also sends a signal to those who would not want to be in a church that is affirming. And that clarity is there on all sides, right? There are folks who will never darken the door of the church I serve. And that's okay, because we are meeting the world now where we are. Yeah, and that too is kind. Kind to us, kind to them, kind to all.
If that meeting people where they are at kind of the early stages question is something you want to talk more about, I want to invite you to join the workshop that Susan and I are leading on Saturday morning, which is the perfect time for a workshop at APCE, by the way. But that's
especially with a snowstorm and ice storm.
But Saturday morning at 8:30, Susan and I will lead a workshop on building bridges as allies in complicated spaces. So if your church is one of those where this is a harder conversation for a variety of reasons, or your regional body or whatever, we're going to talk about that more in detail in that workshop. As you move on to our final section, we're not quite done yet, but I wanted to make sure this got passed around. If you registered for this workshop ahead of time, we probably have your name and email address already, and we will send like the PowerPoint and things afterward. But if you aren't sure we have your email, or if you weren't previously signed up and you'd like to have that, that's what this sign-up sheet is for. So I will just make sure this goes around and while we continue.
On that note of standing where we are, and that being a kind and clear statement as well, we're really at the point where when we are discussing these sorts of topics, we do have to have just a couple minutes of real talk. We already alluded to it with the pride flag. When you make a decision as a congregation to hoist the pride flag up on the pole or on the side of the building, buy them in bulk, because chances are they will be ripped down or stolen. Increasingly, in a polarized culture, the stands that any congregation chooses to make will be met with a variety of responses. And so it is incumbent upon us to be honest about that. If the work of the congregation in education does not include working with the office manager on how to handle a hate-filled phone call or an email that includes a veiled threat of violence. That has to be part of the equation. Showing up at Pride may also invite scorn from the community, say if the Pride organization has published a list of all the vendors and folks having tents and stands in the field. We are in a time that taking a stand costs something. And there will be great gains, and there will be some pains as well. In the olden days, it felt like this conversation was simply, you know what, some folks are going to leave your church, and some folks are going to join your church that never felt welcomed before, and there's loss. These days, the reality is just a recognition that the world is more volatile at this moment than it has been for decades. And so being ready, you know, as we increase and expand our welcome, there might be some tension and nuance, because as we increase and expand our welcome, we might also have to have a conversation about a safety plan that includes locking the doors during the first hymn. And those two things feel antithetical to one another because we're talking about welcome, and sometimes welcome means safety, and those conversations also have to happen. I'm thinking, so I'm a lectionary preacher, and I'm going to be skipping out of Pittsburgh to get back to Idaho, hopefully without the snow and ice getting in my way. But I am thinking a lot about this weekend's text where Jesus is calling the disciples and starting that ministry. And in Matthew's gospel, he makes a point of saying that after Jesus hears that John was arrested, he goes to a place set apart for a while, and then he comes back and he starts calling the disciples. And he uses the exact same words that John was using. And what's striking me this year, as I'm reading this text that we have heard 100 times, is that Jesus hears that John is arrested. He goes away for a little bit, and he comes back using the same words that John used. He had made a choice. And that choice was going to be costly. And then he invited others to join him on the journey, knowing full well that there was cost involved. I don't know what to do with that, but I will by Sunday morning, I hope. There will be risk and there will be reward. But living into Christ-like welcome and inclusion, that radical hospitality that should not be radical, sometimes means being on the line, standing where Christ stands. So that feels like it ends on a really down note, and so we should at least
take questions.
Take questions.
We have about 2 minutes.
I have a friend who's an activist in Toronto, and his observation of the Pride Parade is that rather than marching in the parade and being visible, maybe you should be on the margins protecting the people who are marching from those people who are protesting. I thought that was an interesting insight. Just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah. As Brian said, our congregation has been a part of Pride for many, many years. And we have gotten, it's not a policy, it's not written down, it's not a demand of the Peace and Justice Committee, but we have gotten to the point now that the vast majority of front-facing folks, we have now a float in addition to marching. The vast majority of folks participating on the ground identify as part of the LGBTQIA+ community. And then others, cisgender straight allies, have supportive roles, including standing at the booth to take care of those who come with ulterior motives, to say, let's have a conversation. this person here is not going to be the one who has to suffer with your line of questioning. I'll handle that. And I don't claim any ownership to this. I have just seen it organically happen where the allies have taken supporting roles. I think that's an interesting thought.
Any other questions? Reflections? Yeah.
Just
I think we're too mindful about intersectionality,
I know that you mentioned a few times this idea of people.
with multiple marginalities, it's just something that I think is, we can't stand.
Yeah. The reality is that people who represent different marginalized communities in the same person, or intersectional realities, adds an extra layer of challenge. J. Herbert Nelson, who is a former member of the board of the Covenant Network and stated clerk of the General Assembly, he often talked about the second strike was his language. That if you're already challenged, already have received a negative message from the church, and there's extra factors, it's more than twice as bad. It's new problems, new challenges, new reasons to be fearful or to feel on the outside. And so all of us who are attentive to that, especially those of us who are LGBTQ but white and cisgender, let's say, as in my case, just because we've experienced one marginalization doesn't mean we fully understand everyone who's marginalized. And churches need to be especially attentive to those needs. From the Zoom.
And just because they don't get a chance to speak too much, Kelsey DiCarlo, who's on Zoom, has said in our city does not have a pride parade, but rather a fair. We sponsor the organization and provide them space for events during the year to offer support beyond monetary. On the day of Pride, we pass out water. And
There you go. I mean, my favorite story from Pride in Boise, this is actually a good place to end, is the story of one year, many years ago, the church had on its table in the booth a tablecloth on which people could write whatever message they wanted to the church. Do you still do that every time?
Yes, yep.
And, well, I should probably let you tell the story, except I tell it in sermons all the time. So,
Go for it, Brian.
And people write all sorts of things. Some of them write, "Thank you for being here." Some of them write, "I wish I could go back to church."
A couple of them write things that we're not going to say because this is live streamed.
Right. Or "I hate you," or "I hate God." And they bring all that pain and all that confusion and all that joy and all of it, and they write it on this thing in Sharpies. And as the story was told to me, the next Sunday, the next Communion Sunday, the church takes that tablecloth and processes it in with the communion elements and covers the Lord's table with it. And those voices are part of the church's life by being there in authenticity, in speaking their truth. And surely that is what the Lord's table represents, the coming together of all of God's people. I think that's a good place for us to end this conversation, that this work isn't about church membership growth. It isn't even about just showing someone a solitary act of goodwill or compassion. It is about being more authentically the body of Christ together. That's what welcome is. And I hope that this has been helpful in thinking through what that might look like in your context, and that you'll reach out to us if we can help take more steps down that road. The brochures on the tables are about the Covenant Network, and my contact information is on there. You're welcome to reach out anytime, and we appreciate you being here today. Thank you.